So now we're going to look at photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is going to take that sunlight energy, so that kinetic energy, and turn it into food, so chemical energy. We're going to take a look first at a question related to photosynthesis. So this one is to make you think, right? So where does the matter for a plant come from? So this is a big picture on photosynthesis. So if I have a tree, right, and we start with it at 5 pounds, and that includes the pot, the soil, and the plant, and we let it grow for 5 years, right? So we water it and let it grow, so nothing else is added. So the pot stays the same, the dirt stays the same. We give it the water it needs so it doesn't die. And at the end of those 5 years, it now weighs 155 pounds. You see that the tree has gotten quite a bit bigger. My question is, where does the mass come from? So what did the tree use to get bigger? Okay. So think about that. What did the tree use to add that 150 pounds? Because again, the pot and the soil haven't changed. We haven't added anything to that other than the water it needed to be able to stay alive. All right, so let's think about what we know about what plants need. So we know that plants need water, right? So they need water, and they need sun. And you might have thought about, if you didn't put it in there, but they also need carbon dioxide, okay? Some of you may have also put in there something like nutrients. You might have said something about like the soil or something like that. The thing is that the nutrients right here, this would be things like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These aren't going to actually create much mass, and we'll talk a little bit later on in the semester about those. And we'll see even when we talk about plants, they need them, but they don't need a lot of them. These are the 3 main ingredients that plants need to do their conversion of light energy into chemical energy, right? The sunlight, that's just energy, so it's not going to add any mass to the plant. Water is going to add a little bit, but not a lot. The majority of the mass of a plant is going to come from carbon dioxide, from basically kind of thin air. This is because the carbon is the base for making the sugars, the chemical that they're going to build through photosynthesis. Okay? So let's take a look at who does photosynthesis. So what kinds of organisms do you know do photosynthesis? My guess is that you probably said something like plants, right? Grass, trees, those sorts of things. And those are the organisms we think of when we think about organisms that do photosynthesis. But they're not the only ones. These organisms also do photosynthesis. So who do we have here? We have Euglena and dinoflagellates. These two are types of algae. Right. We've also got kelp. So those belong, they're also a type of algae, but you know them commonly as seaweeds. Right. And then the last group are these guys right here. I'm not going to rewrite that one. They're called cyanobacterium. So there's a small group of bacteria that have the ability to do photosynthesis. Not all of them can, but just this small group. So these are the other kinds of organisms that can do photosynthesis. And actually, these organisms that you see on the picture can do just as much or more photosynthesis than the plants that we think of, because these guys live in the water, and a majority of our planet is covered in water. So you can thank some algae and some seaweed because they are producing a good chunk of our oxygen on the planet. All right, so let's take a look at photosynthesis. So we're going to take a look first at photosynthesis in the big picture. Then we're going to move our way into where it's going on, then some information about things like sunlight, because that's an important part of photosynthesis, and then we'll look at more of the detail on photosynthesis. So, big picture is the equation. What goes in, what comes out, right? So, what comes in, there are 3 inputs. So this is what we were just talking about a little bit ago. So sunlight energy, water, H2O, and carbon dioxide, CO2. And you can write these either way. So if you are comfortable writing them as words, you can write them as words. If you want to write it as sun, pardon my awkward writing, and so you can write it this way, CO2, right? So you can write it as the chemical equations. And then, so that's what's coming in. And so we've got the sunlight obviously coming in from the sun onto the leaves. The water is coming up through the roots. And then the carbon dioxide is going to be absorbed through from the atmosphere, through the leaves. Then the outputs, there's 2 products or outputs. Those are oxygen. So that would be, if you want the chemical equations, it would be O2. And then sugar, this one, generally most people just write it as sugar because the chemical equation, and of course I've run out of room for it, I'll write it down here, is C6H12O6. So you can write it either way or a combination of the 2, whichever one you're most familiar with. And then as far as where these guys end up, oxygen is going to be released from the plant. So that's why we get oxygen from plants to breathe. And then the sugar is going to be used in the plant. So it will be used to build things in the plant. It's also going to be used as an energy source in the plant because the plants are going to need energy as well to make things run. So that's the big picture. Where does photosynthesis happen in the plant? Well, it's going to happen in the chloroplasts. So chloroplasts are the organelle inside of the plant that is in charge of doing photosynthesis. Now, not all of the cells in a plant actually have chloroplasts. So you can see here, this is a cross-section of a leaf. The top cells in a leaf are actually kind of empty, and that's to provide kind of like a sunblock protection against super strong sun rays like UV and so forth. But then all of the cells here in the middle, you can see they're bright green. That's because they're packed with chloroplasts. And then you can see the bottom edge down here. So this is where those chloroplasts are going to be found. And here is a chloroplast. So there are 2 main sections of a chloroplast. They are surrounded by a double membrane, and in the inside we've got 2 sections. We've got the thylakoid. So the thylakoid membranes, these guys are the guys that look like little stacks of coins or stacks of green pancakes. And the thylakoids are important because this is where the photo part of photosynthesis is going to happen. So this is where we're going to see the light coming in and getting converted into chemical energy. So we'll see these guys here in a little bit. This is where the chlorophyll comes in. So if you've heard of chlorophyll in plants, this is where you're going to find chlorophyll, is in the thylakoids. So we'll see these guys here in a little bit when we talk about the actual parts of photosynthesis, the more detailed sections. So we've got the thylakoids for the photo part of photosynthesis, and then there's the stroma. And the stroma is the liquidy part inside of the chloroplast that surrounds the thylakoids. So this is, the stroma is where the synthesis part of photosynthesis happens. And so the way I remember the stroma is where synthesis happens to make sugar. All right. Because that's what synthesis is going to do. The synthesis part is where we're going to make sugars. And we'll see that again a little later on.